Hello everyone, this is Philosophy 72, this is week 7 and we are doing Nietzsche this week and the next. Okay, so we had done Spinoza most recently, but remember that the theme of the course, right, is the self, the other and the world. We started with Descartes, right? I mean, we started with the first class was on the painting by René Magritte. This is not a pipe, and some pages from Gramsci, right, from the prison notebooks. And then we got into Descartes, the meditations, some of them Leibniz, and the question of the notion of an individual substance, and then Spinoza, where we start already seeing with Spinoza a kind of a deconstruction of the idea of the self that is so central in Descartes. I mean, Descartes establishes the self, the subject, the I think, right? Therefore, I am, and so on. In Spinoza, we already saw that this kingdom within a kingdom, right? This individual who is independent and free to choose as he or she pleases is largely a fiction. It's not actually the case, right? And remember that we saw that with Spinoza. We had two classes on Spinoza, and now with Nietzsche, this deconstruction, this critique, this attack continues. Okay, so with Nietzsche, we are looking at some sections from this week from the wonderful book called On the Genealogy of Morals or of Morality. And we're looking especially at sections from passages from essays 1 and 2. And then next time we'll see something from another book by Nietzsche, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Okay, so in any case, the words that I put for today, problematic maybe for this week, are, you see in the syllabus, Nietzsche, distraction of, deconstruction, distraction of metaphysics. We saw metaphysics at the beginning of this class, the study of the essence of reality, that which in reality is really real, meaning that there is therefore a split between the essence of reality and the appearance, what appears, right? But in Nietzsche, this is under attack. This is one of the main moments in Nietzsche's philosophy, to attack the philosophy that comes from Plato, that according to Nietzsche, Platonism, metaphysics, the split, this split is an invention, Nietzsche says. There is no being behind becoming. There is no essence behind appearance, right? This is actually the passage from essay 1 that I asked you to write on in your journal entry. This is one of the questions in the journal entry, and this is very important, right? I mean, with Nietzsche says, you know, when you destroy the world of essence, of ideas, of real things behind the appearance, then the appearance, what appears itself, is no longer simply what appears, but it is reality. Okay, so basically that's the idea, being and becoming together. Okay, essence and appearance, we may put it this way, together. Okay, there is nothing behind, nothing beyond, in a sense similar to Spinoza, who says God or nature. So there is nothing beyond this God or nature. I noticed that some of you, many of you, did not like this. You were not in agreement with Spinoza. Other times that I teach the same, people agree more, perhaps, with him. But in any case, you know, you can disagree, and but you should engage the thought of the philosopher of the text that we are reading before disagreeing. I mean, you should argue, you know, for that, for what your view might be different from that of the philosopher that we are studying, but in any case, the idea God or nature in Spinoza is actually becomes even more extreme with Nietzsche, and I anticipate this we will see next time. For Nietzsche, God is dead. And we will see this more next time when we do pages from Thus Spoke Zarathustra. What does that means? Okay, we will see, okay? Perhaps not to be taken literally. We will see what that means next time. But for now, yes, there is nothing beyond, nothing behind. Okay, so that's basically the idea. We will focus on that passage from Essay 1. So, destruction of metaphysics, destruction of religion, and morality. Okay, so that's basically why I asked you in the discussion board entry to say whether you agree with basically the destruction of everything, but not for the sake of destroying, but for the sake of building something new. And this something new will be the overman that we will see more next time as we do, pages from Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the overhuman, I like to say, okay, overman, that which comes after the death of a man, the death of the human being, because just like God is dead, the human being is sick and about to die, and there will be this overman, overhuman coming, the construction of something new, which is not metaphysical anymore, right? I mean, or religious and so on, moral in character, but it is rather artistic. Life as a work of art, an aesthetic construction. Okay, so let's see. I like to then read what you think of this. Make sure that again you do your assignments, right? Right. I mean. The journal entry, the discussion board entry. Okay, so the journal entry is two questions. One is precisely from this idea that there is nothing behind, right? I mean, that the doer is invented, the subject, the self, the I is an afterthought. What counts is the action, the deed, and not the doer, the doing and not the doer, the maker or something, right? So think about this in relation to Descartes, the subject. Think about this in relation to also theology. The idea of God is the maker, the doer, the subject, the highest one, creating everything and so on. We saw that this was already under attack with Spinoza, even more so with Nietzsche, okay, because again, God is dead, we will see next time, okay, more. So, and then, another question that's for the journal entry coming from based on the second essay, so you should read, again, remember, I highlight some things for you, but read, focus on those sections especially, and the second question comes from it's based on really the outset of essay 2 in on the genealogy of morality. It has to do with this idea, great problematic idea, great moment in Nietzsche, that the human being is the animal with the prerogative to make promises. And what does that mean in relation to the construction, as he goes into in essay 2, I had to be very fast, the construction of a memory, right? The fact that we are not allowed to forget, right? And, think about that at the level of daily life. I mean, we can't forget that we had to go to work. We can't forget that we had to pay rent and pay bills and so on and so forth, right? I mean, I cannot say simply, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot, right? So this construction of a memory happens, Nietzsche says, however, through a process of internalization of some fundamental rules, a process of normalization, and this is a violent process, right? I mean, even education as such, right? A process of cruelty, he says, right? Then, I have my memory. My memory is also my responsibility. I make some promises. I am then responsible. So much for freedom in the sense I do as I please. No, Nietzsche says no. We don't do as we please. We do as we are conditioned, determined to do because of this, normalization process, institutionalization process. We ultimately, okay, build our memory and our conscience this way. Okay, so that's basically what you find in essay 2, which is, of course, also focused on the idea, of a guilt, right? I mean, and debt, right? We have a debt, DEBT, to pay back, and so on and so forth. Okay, but let me go through some of, the most important moments. I can, I just want to say a few words about the title of essay 1 that you find on page 10, right? Good and evil, good and bad. This may be confusing. Let me be as simple and as clear as I can. He says there are these two pairs of concepts that seem similar. I mean, the word good is the word good, but in one pair, right, of these opposites, then the opposite of good is evil, and then the opposite of good is bad. Evil and bad are not the same. In any case, you will find these categories, these figures in the first essay, like the noble class, the noble group, and then the basically the slave mentality, okay, and the priestly mentality. So good and bad is what belongs as a category of, if you will, morality to the noble class. And these words should not be taken in a sociological, historical, political sense with Nietzsche, I believe, but they are more like psychological, anthropological types. The noble, the warrior, right? The person who does as the people who do as really, not as they please in the sense of any free will. There is no free will in Nietzsche, but who have a preference, and they follow their preference, which is to follow they follow their desire. They do something, the people who do something, because they like doing it, and for no other reason, regardless of what other people might think. Right? So I do this because it's good, and what I don't do is simply bad. I'm not going to say that it is evil or any other moralizing type of value judgment, but there is this other type, right? Ideal type, if you will, the people who say, what you do is evil, and because I don't do it, then I am good. Okay, so this is a reactive type of mentality, which is the slave mentality. Again, slave, not to be taken in the sociological, historical, political sense, legal sense, but in the anthropological, psychological sense of the type of a person. Okay, right? I mean, and think about this in daily life. How many people, are always pointing the finger to what others do, always judging, to be judgmental in that negative sense, right? I mean, oh, you shouldn't do this. What you do is evil, right? And usually the evil then, and Nietzsche says that is the enemy, the evil enemy, and the evil enemy must be destroyed. And because I don't do it, I am automatically good. Okay, so that's the mentality that we very often find in our societies, and Nietzsche is against this mentality, the priestly mentality. The slave morality, he says there is a revolt, a slave revolt in morality, and instead the other pair of concepts, good and bad, is positive, let's say, because it is about, right, saying yes to life. I do this because that's what I like doing, right? That's my preference. Again, it's not a question of free will. So I do it, and I'm not saying that if what the opposite of it is evil. I'm repeating, it is simply bad for me, right? I don't like it, right? So that's the question, and it is instead the other mentality, the slave mentality, that calls things, especially Nietzsche says, things that come from the outside, evil, right? The foreigner, the stranger, what is strange, right? Is evil, right? And this is the mentality that says no to everything, right? The only creative acts, the only creative deed is for the priestly class to say no. You can't, you shouldn't do it, you must not do it, and so on and so forth. I don't do it, I'm good, right? But this is a slave type of slave in the sense that we saw already with Spinoza, in a sense, the bondage kind of situation, servitude that we saw in Spinoza, if you recall, right? So, I mean, but it is instead, it is the other one, the mentality that, and the attitude, if you will, that affirms life, that says yes to life. That's the good one. So in any case, then I will get into, then you find on page 12 this question of the pathos of nobility and distance. Remember, nobility not to be taken in right, I mean, a political, historical, sociological sense. He speaks about this good and bad situation. Okay, this is so and so, I do it, I like it doing it, and so on. The opposite is the case with the other one. And then see especially the highlighted sections that highlighted by me. And then he goes into the question of the clergy, the priestly mentality on page already 7, right? And the evil enemies already on page I'm sorry, that was page 16, and then page 17, and the slaves revolt in morality on page 18. And there is one great section 10 that comes on page 20. Is really important. Maybe I read a few lines from here. The beginning of the slaves revolt in morality happens, right, occurs when resentment, you have this resentment, it's written the French way, doesn't matter, okay? That's Nietzsche's choice, okay? Resentment itself. Think about what is it to always have a resentment, right? Itself turns creative and gives birth to values. The resentment of those beings who denied the proper response of action compensate for it only with imaginary revenge, whereas all noble morality grows out of a triumphant saying yes to itself. Slave morality says no on principle to everything that is outside other, non-self, and this no is its creative deed. Okay, so this reversal of the evaluating glance, this essential orientation to the outside instead of back onto itself, is a feature of resentment. In order to come about, slave morality first has to have an opposing external world, and so on and so forth. Okay, its action is basically a reaction. Okay, it is this reactive attitude that comes with resentment and with slave morality. This is very important, right? Think about that. Apply, for example, this to situations. Think about possible examples, and this is great. And then he goes more into the question of resentment on page 22, the question of the evil one, which is the enemy, right? And again, I skip many sections, but read again the highlighted parts especially. And then on page 26, right, this is on section 13, page 26, you have that passage that I ask you to also consider to write on, which is, I read in the middle of the page, but there is no such substratum. There is nothing underneath, underlying. There is no being behind the deed, right? The action. It's effect, right? And what becomes of it, becoming, right? I mean, all that counts is the effect of something, right? The doer, in scare quotes, the doer is invented as an afterthought. The doing is everything. Okay, think about possible illustrations of this. You know, when I do something, I become one with the thing that I'm doing, the action that I'm doing. There is no separation and so on. Um, but apply this to, there are so many examples that you can think about. Martial arts, dance, right? Dancing is also a good example of this, and so on. Second essay, I don't have much time. Guilt, bad conscience, and related matters begins on page 35, and that's where I ask you also to write about, this question of the promise to breed an animal with the prerogative to promise. Okay, and that's the paradoxical. He says, in an ironic way, even forgetfulness. Okay, we, like I said before, we are not allowed to forget. And this is where the long history of the origins of responsibility begins. The sovereign individual, you find on page 37, set in italics, which is going to be attacked by Nietzsche, criticized, destroyed. There is no sovereign individual, there is no sovereignty, just like in Spinoza, uh, whose prerogative it is to promise. This man who is now free, he says, again, ironically, right? Who has actually has the prerogative to promise, this master of the free will, this sovereign. You find this again highlighted on page 37. This character is a fiction, right? The sovereign individual. Think about that. I mean, we are not really independent. Certainly not in a total way. We are always, right? If anything, interdependent. We are always in relations to others and so on and so forth. But in any case, that's where responsibility comes from. Conscience, his conscience, on the end of page 37, memory. And there are techniques, and these techniques are techniques of violence. Mnemonics, you find on page 38, okay, which is there is nothing more terrible and strange in man's prehistory than these techniques for the construction of a memory. Okay, so that's basically what he's speaking about, and he says there is then an attack against religions in general, right? I mean, he's not singling out one, although there is always, usually he focuses on, right, the critique is against the philosophically the tradition coming from Plato, and then the Judeo-Christian tradition. But in any case, religions are, think about that for yourself, if you agree, they're most fundamental, in the middle of page 38, systems of cruelty. There is always this violence, cruelty. In any case, and then you have reason. This is how reason itself is built, constructed. And on page 39, the end of page 39, I want you to look at that particularly. There is this great moment in which Nietzsche says the guilt. Think about that. What is it to be guilty, to feel guilty? I feel guilty only when I internalize the guilt. I mean, perhaps I have not done anything wrong, but if they, convince me that I am the guilty one, then that's how I feel. Guilt and that. He says in German, in the German language, they are the same in terms of language. Schuld is guilt, Schulden, debts. And this debt, think about that, it's not only economic, financial in character. I mean, today this is very important to the problem of being in debt, having to pay back. but also in terms of, it's the same language that you find also in criminal justice, people who had to pay a debt to society, so in terms of time, and in religion. Okay, so the language of finance, economics, the language of the law, and the language criminal justice, and the language of religion are similar in this sense, based on the idea of guilt and debt. Okay, so that's very important. I leave that to you to think about. Very powerful stuff. And again, I don't have much time, but there is another important moment on page 49. Again, he goes back to the question of the difference between the noble and the other type of person: bad conscience, resentment, again. And again, there are so many important sections you will see. I mean, ideally read the whole thing, okay? And then, the question of that I already spoke about, internalization, like even internalizing the guilt, right? That's important, or internalizing whatever, the discipline, internalizing, the rule, and so on and so forth, okay? Internalization, which is then the basis of the soul for Nietzsche. Okay, so you find that on page 57. And then he goes back to the question of resentment. I mean, the next essay, essay 3, if you had time, that's great too. You can read it, but I ask you to focus on these two, 1 and 2, and, make sure that you do the reading. There is also an important passage on page 62 about, again, the question of death, and the possibility of a second innocence, which is outside the logic of death, and um, then this important moment, page 65, 66, right, to understand the question of destruction and construction of something new. He says if a shrine, right, a temple, is to be set up, built, right, then a shrine, or temple in another translation, has to be destroyed. So you have destruction, but then also construction, okay? And then he says we have inherited this violence and cruelty. And then the essay ends with the idea of Zarathustra coming, the godless. And we will speak about Zarathustra, this fictional character, next time when we do sections from the book precisely called Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Again, ask questions if you have any. Nietzsche might be, he is considered to be, just like Spinoza, a dangerous philosopher. His language is very powerful, and at times the language itself kind of violence. But try to read Nietzsche with caution as well. I mean, it's not that we had to take what he says every time in a literal way, but understand really his lesson, which is a lesson of critique, really, and pointing out some important problems of within modernity, problems that are with us today. Think about even the question of violence today, which is still there, right? All levels of daily life, institutional life, and so on. Okay, so in any case, see you next time. Thank you. Bye.